Have you ever watched an organization do something that just makes no sense? Something that seems completely at odds with what they claim to be doing. We see this happen so often that we usually just write it off as failure or incompetence. But what if it's not? What if it's a sign of some hidden structural force at work? Okay, so let's start with the basic idea we all have. We create organizations to solve problems, right? We see them as tools, engineered to get something done, whether that's educating students, building a company, or maybe even changing the world. And yet, when you watch these organizations over time, you start to see this gap appear. A space opens up between the system's stated purpose and what it actually does. The goal they talk about and the behavior you see, they just start to drift apart. Now, this isn't about one-off mistakes or somebody having bad intentions. It's a pattern. It's this slow, steady, and weirdly predictable deviation away from that original mission. It's like an institutional drift, and it's being pushed by a logic that we can't quite see yet. And what's really wild is that this pattern isn't just in one type of organization. You see it everywhere, in governments, in giant corporations, in small nonprofits, even in social movements. It almost seems to be a fundamental property of how we organize, period. So, picture this. An agency is created with one crystal clear mission: cut through the red tape, streamline the rules, make things simpler for everyone. But you check back in a few years later, and it's become this labyrinth of its own internal procedures and regulations. It's ended up generating the very complexity it was designed to get rid of. Or how about a revolutionary movement? It's built on these exciting principles of freedom and radical new ideas, all aimed at tearing down the old establishment. And then, years later, you find that it's become this rigid institution that enforces its own strict set of rules, its own dogma, and it crushes any kind of dissent. The revolutionary? Well, it's become the new establishment. As this drift keeps happening, something else starts to emerge. All these very different organizations, with all their unique goals, they start to look strangely similar. And they're not all starting to look alike because they're all succeeding. No. They start to converge in their internal structure, their procedures, their hierarchies. They actually begin to share the exact same structural flaws. To really get why this happens, we need a different way to think about it. Stop thinking of an organization as a permanent building. Instead, think of it as a scaffold. It's a temporary structure. It's put up for one reason and one reason only: to support the people who are actually building something else, the real goal, the mission. The scaffold itself was never the point. You see, the logic here is kind of a trap. Any big mission needs an organized group. Any big group needs to delegate tasks and authority. That delegation, well, it always creates a special class of people: coordinators, decision-makers. And that new class, they're the ones who end up controlling all the resources the organization needs to run. So the simple act of organizing creates this new, separate layer within the system. You get a leadership class, and their day-to-day work isn't the external mission anymore, it's the internal management of the organization itself. And this is where everything starts to diverge. The goal for a regular member is still focused on that outside mission, but the rational #1 goal for the leadership, it becomes something different. Their careers, their influence, their stability, all of it depends on the survival and the health of the organization. Their new mission is to keep the machine running. And just like that, the original mission gets flipped on its head. It's not the end goal anymore. It becomes a resource. It's the story the leadership uses to get funding, to attract talent, to get political support, all to make sure the organization itself keeps on existing. This phenomenon actually has a name. It's called goal displacement. It's that exact moment when maintaining the internal machinery, the rules, the budgets, the power structures, becomes way more important than the external reason the machinery was built in the first place. It's like the construction crew just stopped working on the building altogether, and instead, they spend all their time and all their resources just reinforcing, polishing, and expanding the scaffold. The tool has become the job. So this whole process, this drift, this displacement, it's not a mistake. It isn't a sign of some moral failure. It's the logical, totally predictable result of the system's own internal pressures. In fact, sociologists figured this out over a century ago. They gave it a name, the iron law of oligarchy. And what it says is that any complex organization, doesn't matter how democratic or mission-driven it is at the start, will eventually develop a leadership class, an oligarchy. And the number one goal of this new class will always be to preserve the organization and their place inside of it. The day-to-day needs of running the system just end up overpowering the system's original reason for being. So, the next time you see an organization acting in a way that seems to go against its own mission, ask yourself, is the system really failing? Or is it actually succeeding at a completely different, hidden goal, its own survival? The system isn't broken. It's working perfectly.